everyone, welcome to the June 7th edition of the TimeformUS Pacecast. I'm David Aragona here with my usual co-host Craig Milkowski. It is Belmont Stakes week. We'll be talking a lot about those New York races a little bit later in the week when we do the TimeformUS forecast in a couple of days. We will have a guest on to help us dissect the late pick 5 sequence on Belmont Stakes Day. But on this Pacecast, as we usually do, we're going to look in the rearview mirror, check out some races from last weekend. And Craig, most of the ones that we talked about on the forecast last week at Churchill Downs, we'll recap here, beginning this show with a lot of races to talk about from Churchill Downs. They ran many stakes races this past weekend, mostly on that Saturday card. We'll also discuss a couple of other venues, or actually 3 other venues, Belmont Park, where they ran the Pennine Ridge on Saturday, a couple of 3-year-old turf stakes from Penn National on Friday night, and then we'll finish things up with a couple races from Santa Anita. But Craig, the bulk of the action is at Churchill Downs. Some dirt stakes, some turf stakes, and plenty of upsets.
Yeah, it was not my best performance on the pick 5. I know that. But luckily, I didn't invest a lot of money in it because there were some upsets and a couple that were head scratchers for me that I didn't have. A couple of them made sense and just didn't like the price. But I thought Saturday was a good, solid night of racing at Churchill.
Yeah, I wanted to start the conversation with one of the non-graded stakes, but the race that received the biggest speed figure among those stakes races from last weekend. That was the Blame Stakes, race 10 on that Saturday card. This one was featuring the return of American Revolution, that Todd Pletcher runner that had won the Cigar Mile last year, but he was just pretty flat coming off the layoff, and it was the other Todd Pletcher runner, Dynamic One, who finally got back to the winner's circle, getting a surprisingly favorable pace setup, one that didn't figure to materialize on paper.
Yeah, it was. That was the only reason I didn't like it. I like him. I know we have mentioned Dynamic One. I thought he was in really good form and sitting on a good race, but it just didn't look like there was a lot of pace. And it turned out the pace was pretty quick with Super Stock surprisingly going to the front. Santos Dumont was up there setting it, and pretty soon thereafter, American Revolution joined in. So not only were the fractions solid, I think there was a lot of pressure as well. And Dynamic One was able to take advantage and run a good race. He's a horse that's in really good form right now. He ran a 125 TimeformUS speed figure for the win, a career best for him, and kind of joins the older horse crop as a horse who's going to be dangerous in graded stakes, I think.
Yeah, this was just the third victory of his career. He had won the Curlin Stakes at Saratoga last summer in pretty similar fashion, looking very impressive that day. Not able to take that next step forward in the Travers or in his couple of starts earlier this year when he was beaten twice by Scalding, but able to turn the tables on that rival here. Craig, we had talked about on the forecast last week how it looked like Scalding and American Revolution were supposed to fall into the right trips up close to what was going to be a slow pace or predicted to be a slow pace. But some runners to the inside got way more aggressive than you would have expected, so it did set it up a little better for Dynamic One. What do you make of that performance of those two favorites, particularly American Revolution? Do you think we can just give him a pass because it was his first start back from the layoff, or was this almost too disappointing to have high hopes that he can get back to his form from last year?
Yeah, I'm not going to write him off just yet. He was too good at the end of last year, and at the end of the day, this was just a listed stakes, just 200,000. So I think he's going to be fine. Scalding was the one I would say was a little more disappointing. Though when you look at the speed figures, he basically ran the same figure he's been running all the time. It's the same number he ran in his win last time out. So maybe he's just not quite as good. So of the two, I would prefer American Revolution going forward based on what I saw last year.
Yeah, I did not like this performance from American Revolution. It just never seemed like he was getting a hold of that track or finishing with the same gusto that we have seen from him last year. But what I will say is, remember, Todd Pletcher had been training him to run against an overmatched field of New York breds on Memorial Day. That race didn't fill, and at the last minute, he had to change course to run in this Blame Stakes, which was a much tougher spot than the one that he had been training for. So maybe he just wasn't fully cranked up to deliver his A effort in this return, or the return that they had originally planned. So maybe that's a reason why you want to give American Revolution a pass for this race. And I'm with you, Craig. I mean, you took a step backwards from a speed figure standpoint, which you don't want to see a horse do when they turn 4, but he probably can do better than this. Let's move on to another race on the dirt from that Saturday card at Churchill Downs, the Aristides, going the sprint distance, 6 furlongs. This was another one that featured an upset, Craig. Again, a race that featured a much faster pace than the pace projector was predicting, or most people who handicapped it would have predicted, because there just wasn't a whole lot of front-running speed to find in this race, but it did materialize a little bit as long-range Toddy got a much more aggressive ride than you might have expected. Not a fast pace, but it still fell apart enough for Bango to win.
Yeah, this was a case where I think pressure was more important than the fractions. And let's be honest, these were not very good sprinters coming in this race, particularly for a $200,000 purse. Just looking at the speed figures of the horses coming in, it was not pretty. And I think that's kind of what we saw on the track. The winner, Bango, just seems to be a horse that always shows up at Churchill, got a great ride, saving a lot of ground, and was able to run down horses that were in front of him despite that slow pace. So I don't want to take too much away from him. He got a 113 figure. The final time was 118 because of that slow pace, but as a group, this was just not a good field.
Yeah, and as we talk about these first couple of races, I am noticing that light blue color-coded box in the race rating area in TimeformUS PPs, indicating that this was a track on Saturday where there was sort of a pattern on the dirt of horses coming from off the pace, maybe having a slight advantage. Did you notice that? I mean, some of these upsets, there is a little bit of consistency and closers getting the job done in the stakes that we're going to talk about. So maybe it was that kind of track. And when you see a pace like this where they don't go that quickly up front and the closer still wins, it does maybe lead you to believe that speed was not carrying the way it normally does.
Yeah, and that's a good point. It's one I'm going to have to go back and review, see if maybe it was a rail situation. I'm not sure, although I think Bango spent a good bit of time on the rail. But speed definitely didn't do good as you peruse through the charts. Horses came from well off the pace in several of the races and seemed to be out wider. But that's not unusual for closers.
Yeah, Top Gunner, the horse that looked like he was supposed to get the right trip up front, he ended up getting a pretty good trip, and boy, he looked like he was odds-on at the top of the stretch when he cruised up to take the lead, and it seemed like when they pressed the button, he was going to draw from the field, but when he got asked for run, he kind of got to wandering a little bit, barely held on for third at the end, so that was a little visually surprising given the way that he came into the stretch, but yeah, Bango did get the trip, and he's a horse that has always loved Churchill Downs, just needed his last race and took a step forward here. Craig, another race that featured a pretty significant upset on the dirt on Saturday was the Shawnee Stakes for the fillies and mares going the mile and the 16th distance. We just did not see the good version of Pauline's Pearl here. She got bet down to the 2-5 favorite, coming off that grade 1, and I'm doing grade 1 in quotation marks, victory in the La Troyenne last time. But she didn't run nearly that well here, as she just never seemed to have that late punch that she possessed last time through the stretch of this Shawnee. And it was actually the long shot, She's All Wolf, who ran right by them all to get up to win at 20-1.
Yeah, I don't even think that name came up on our podcast. She's All Wolf. She had run a big second at Oaklawn behind Miss Bigley, I think it was, with a similar figure to what she ran today. She ran a 111 here. So another race that, you know, for the big purse, it didn't, I won't say this one didn't draw as good a field, but the two main players didn't really show up. Pauline's Pearl regressed quite a bit, and Army Wife basically ran the same figure she'd been running as a 3-year-old, so she's going to need to step forward. I was actually more disappointed in her than Pauline's Pearl, because as you said, that Pauline's Pearl grade 1, that feels a lot overrated to me, but I expected more of a jump from Pauline's Pearl. Maybe it's just a case of coming off the layoff. She wasn't cranked fully like we talked about with American Revolution, but I don't know. It just wasn't a good effort.
No, it really wasn't. And She's All Wolf, she ran one of the better races of her career, but it's not like she had to improve that much from a speed figure standpoint to beat this field, because it just was not a very fast race, and those horses that you would have expected to run the faster numbers just didn't really show up with their best efforts. I was only watching the replay. I didn't catch this race live. I didn't see if there was a steward's inquiry. If there wasn't, I guess that's surprising to me, because Ava's Grace was drifting out badly through the stretch. It was hard to tell if she was completely clear of some horses, and seemed like she cost Pauline's Pearl finishing third in here. Pauline's Pearl still did not show up with a good effort, but I would not have been surprised if they had looked at it. I guess they didn't. But just an ugly race overall for that reason, and just the overall speed figure standpoint. Let's move on to some of the turf races from last weekend at Churchill Downs. 3 Grade 3 events on the turf. Let's begin with one from Saturday. That was the Arlington, going a mile and a 16th on the turf course. This one was won by Admission Office, who was a pretty generous 7-1 coming off the layoff here. Just did not get a lot of respect from the bettors off that 15-month break. But Craig, this horse returning as a new gelding, came into the stretch with a lot of work to do, but he was able to nail that runner-up Get Smokin' on the wire.
Yeah, that was a very good effort by him off the layoff. Brian Lynch has been a pretty hot trainer these days, and yeah, he ran a 119 TimeformUS speed figure. Solid effort from him. I thought Get Smokin' ran very well off the return trip from Dubai, where he was a complete no-show in that race. So it was good to see him get back, and he actually ran a better speed figure than the winner at 122. But yeah, I mean, just a good solid grade 3 race where I think the top 3 actually all ran okay. I mean, nothing to get too excited about, but at least Admission Office, I think he probably wants a little more distance, so he might be stretching out in company where he could run even better than we saw here.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously no real surprise that Admission Office was able to win a race like this based on his form when we had last seen him in 2020 and very early 2021, because he's always been a really classy, nice horse at the grade 2, grade 3 level. Had generally had more success going a little bit longer, like you said. So the fact that he was able to get up over a horse that really ran his race like Get Smokin', I mean, that speaks favorably to how he was doing coming off this long layoff now as a 7-year-old. Get Smokin' was probably softened up a little bit by having to deal with Gray's Fable on the front end. Not that he was applying a ton of pressure, but it's just that his presence was always there to the outside of Get Smokin'. The pace did heat up a little bit in the middle of the race, and he kicked away like he was going to win this at the 8th pole, but Admission Office, who still a good 5 lengths to make up in that last furlong, he was able to do it and run him down right at the wire. It didn't really look like he was going to get there until those final few strides, but get there he did. Floriform, kind of the surprising favorite in this race, Craig. I know we both liked him a little bit, not as the 8-5 public choice. He was somewhat disappointing, as it seemed like he was everybody's wise guy horse in this race.
Yeah, you got to be on your toes in these races, and I wanted no parts of him at 8-5. This was actually one race the betting surprised me, and it was the one race I did decent on as a bettor, because you know, you got to adjust your game to the betting, and no way that horse should have been 8-5. He ran okay. He ran the same speed figures he's been running at 118, but I know we were both looking for some improvement that didn't come.
One of the stakes that we didn't discuss on the forecast last week, run a bit earlier in the day, was the grade 3 Regret for the 3-year-old fillies, going a mile and an 1/8 on the turf course. And this winner, Craig, Walkathon, she's really turned a corner since they've put her on the turf. Now 3 for 3 on the grass, and this was by far the most impressive performance yet. She just kicked away at the top of the stretch and really never gave them a chance. I know McCulloch was trying to take a run at her late, but she could never get that close. The winner was just sprinting through the wire.
Yeah, and it's not like the pace was slow. It was pretty solid up front, particularly after the first quarter was just so-so, but they really picked it up to the half mile, and she was right there tracking the long shot leader. And when she took over, sometimes that's not a good thing when you inherit the lead kind of early, but she had plenty run left. She got a 115 speed figure, which is her career best by quite a bit. So she's one that given her versatility and her obvious ability off that kind of speed figure is just a 3-year-old, she's going to be dangerous going forward in some much bigger races than this one, I would think.
Yeah, I mean, her last 2 victories have come over this Churchill Downs turf course, and I know there's been a lot of talk about the way the turf is playing at Churchill, just the newness of the course and how much they can use it. I know they're cutting back some of the races they scheduled for turf in the upcoming weeks. She's definitely one that has relished that turf course, so we'll see if she's able to produce that form elsewhere, but she really liked the going, especially in this spot. But she's a nice horse. I mean, there's not a whole lot to her when you watch her visually. She's kind of this small little thing, but she's very athletic and has a big stride on her, so she's definitely one that's taken a big step forward on the turf. I wouldn't want to be too down on the runner-up, though, Craig, even though she was beaten as the 4-5 favorite. McCulloch, not a whole lot of running going on from the back of the pack in this race, despite the fact that the pace was on the honest side. But she was really trying at the end. I mean, she put some distance between herself and the third place finisher here, just couldn't quite catch the winner. But McCulloch strikes me as one that isn't going to mind a little bit more ground if they decide to stretch her out in some of those turf triple races at Naira.
Oh yeah, no doubt. I think she ran a fine race. I don't want to get too much into. There wasn't a lot of closing because I'm not sure the horses behind her were really any good to make up in any ground. So sometimes that can be a little deceiving. But she finished fine. She was actually making up some ground late, and I'm sure her final time pace or her late pace figure for this race will be good.
Speaking of the Regret Stakes, we saw the winner of the 2021 Regret come back to win a stakes on Sunday, the Mint Julep, another Grade 3 event on the grass at Churchill, and that was Gam's mission, and getting back to Churchill proved to be the key for her as she was able to get back to the winner's circle, I believe for the first time since she won the Regret last year, and this was a big step forward for her, Craig. I mean, she is a horse that had shown promise last year as a 3-year-old, had a few trips in races, had taken that step forward from a speed figure standpoint in her last couple of races as a 4-year-old, but hadn't really been able to get the job done. This was a nice performance, though.
It was. I'm pretty sure had we done this race on the show, we'd have both liked her. I think we both liked her at the fairgrounds, if memory serves. And she's ran fine in her 2 return races. She's, as you said, shown some speed figure progression. Now a 4-year-old. She was up against it last time in that allowance at Keeneland, but I thought she ran really well, and she backed it up here. She got a 119 speed figure for the win. She beat a really solid horse in Delica, who we've talked about many times. And though that one went quick, she was loose on the lead, which is how she does her best running. And Gam's mission was able to go get her. And it's not like there was a whole bunch of other horses closing from the back. The 2-3 finishers were pretty forwardly placed throughout the race. So I thought this was a really good effort.
Yeah, she covered ground to make that wide move coming off the far turn, but she was able to get there and finished off the race. Delica, I mean, she's always game. She tries really hard. She has that ample early speed where the rider kind of has to coax her not to run off in the early going of her races. I thought it was an admirable effort from her coming off the layoff, but Gam's mission just a little bit better on the day. Finishing up Sunday's card, a couple of races earlier in the day, they ran an allowance race for the older horses going the 1-turn mile. That was won by the Brad Cox-trained Caddo River, a horse that initially looked like he might be a little bit disappointing, not getting back to some of those bigger performances early in his 3-year-old season, but over his last few starts, Craig, it seems like he's really put it together, now 3 in a row, and this was a pretty impressive performance.
It was impressive, but it wasn't I didn't see it live and I saw some of the talk on Twitter. I thought he was going to go right to the Met Mile or something based on the reviews I was seeing. I thought he ran okay. He got a 117 speed figure, 121 final time. I mean, he was 3-5 in the field. There wasn't a lot. I guess the one good thing I would say about him is that he did rate a little bit off of horses, which is something that seems to be new with that he's able to do this year. He did it a little bit last time, but yeah, I'm not as excited as most people were. I think he's a good horse, but I don't think he's a horse who's ready to jump into top races. I saw people mentioning the Stephen Foster already. I don't think he's a horse I'd want any parts of in there.
Yeah, I hear that. He got a great trip in this race and did what he was supposed to do as the 3-5 favorite. Final time, that 133 and change, obviously that's, pretty eye-opening anytime you see a horse go sub 134 for a flat mile, but the Churchill Downs dirt course has been playing extremely fast in recent weeks. I think this course was rated a 9 out of 10 on our track rating scale, which is basically as fast as a dirt course as you're going to see in the Midwest or the East Coast. So don't put too much stock in that final time. He ran a nice race. He closed off his own, moderate fraction. So we'll see what he's able to do against tougher company. I know that they had briefly threw around the Met Mile as a potential target for him. So maybe that's where some of that talk was coming from. But he tried this easier spot first. He's going to have to step up against Stakes Company next time, though.
Yeah, and you did bring up a point that I wanted to. That the surface is really fast at Churchill. It was a very easy day to make speed figures. If you look at the times of the other dirt races, it'll be pretty obvious why that 133 final time didn't translate into a huge speed figure.
Just finishing up one more race from that Saturday card. We saw an allowance race for the 3-year-olds won by Strava, a horse that was coming out of the Lexington Stakes a little bit earlier in the springtime. Getting back into allowance company, though, this horse was pretty impressive. This race featured a very fast pace, but it's not like Strava was that far off it in the early going, and he just drew off as much the best.
Yeah, he was good. He was coming out of that stakes race at Keeneland, the Lexington, and I believe I had tweeted out he was the 4th winner to come out of that race. Now, some of it's placement. These horses were in over their head a little bit, but he's one who's moving in the right direction. His speed figure's improving every single time out, and he's looking like a pretty good 3-year-old to me. One that can, this was just a 1-turn mile, but I think he'll be just fine at 2 turns. And not saying he's going to be a grade 1 type horse, but it wouldn't surprise me if he shows up on kind of those second tier Derby tour, the ones like Indiana, Ohio, Oklahoma, those kind of races, because he is improving every time and just looking like one who's going to get better and better.
Yeah, this race did really fall apart at the end, especially behind him as closers rounded out some of the minor placings. But like we were saying, I mean, his pace figure line is one of a horse that was contesting a fast pace because he really wasn't that far off it. And they were moving up front early in this race. The final time is solid, but he gets a bit of a pace upgrade to the 1:15. And that's the best number that he's run so far. And that's a stakes quality number, probably not graded stakes quality just yet, given where the 3-year-olds are at the middle of their season. But he does seem to be one that's moving forward, as you were suggesting, Craig. So a horse worth following. A 3-year-old that doesn't seem to need much improvement to make that transition into graded stakes company is one that was in action on Friday. That's Conager, who won a 7-furlong allowance race, beating last year's hopeful winner Gunite and doing it pretty convincingly. I don't know where this improvement has come from, Craig, but his last 2 races have been spectacular.
Yeah, I have no idea where this horse came from. This was one of the very rare times where after I made the speed figures and ran the report that I do, I said, okay, I got to go check the Beyer speed figure to see just because it looks so big. But he actually ran a 129 figure. When I checked the Beyer, he got a 104. So we're really not that far apart, seeing how my final time figure was a 127. So just 3 points. So I've got no problem with the figure. And I mean, that's a giant figure for an older horse, let alone a 3-year-old in just early June. So really good effort from him. And I don't want to take too much away from Gunite either, who was a really good 2-year-old, won one of the big races at Saratoga, I believe, maybe the Hopeful. And I thought he ran just fine as well, but Conager was just running away from him through the stretch.
Yeah, I mean, you wondered if that 73-1 upset at Keeneland was a fluke when he had drawn off to win by nearly 7 lengths over what seemed like a pretty good field, but he bettered that performance here, stretching out to the 7 furlongs. He did get to control the pace on the front end, but it's not like he was going that slowly. He was setting an honest pace, and he just closed off it. I mean, he really just powered through the lane to open up on Gunite. Like you said, I think Gunite was ready to run a big race, and he did, but Conager just in a different league, and if he continues to run like this, you've got to imagine he's a major player in a race like the Alan Jerkins Grade 1 event over the summer if they decide to go that route. I mean, the horses that we saw do battle in that race last year, Jackie's Warrior and Life is Good, these are the kind of numbers they were running. So, I mean, he's a horse that could definitely make his presence felt in the sprint division later on if he's able to hold his form.
Yeah, and kind of a good gauge in this race was Surfer Dude, who's been a really solid 3-year-old. He had won an allowance race, might have been on Derby Day if memory serves, with a solid 112 speed figure. There's nothing wrong with that, and he just was absolutely no match for the top 2, especially the winner, of course. But he was just a really good baseline for me when I was making the figure to think, yeah, there was nothing fishy going on here. It's just 2 fast horses.
Let's move on over up to New York to talk about one race from their Saturday card. That was the Grade 2 Pennine Ridge, the local prep for the Turf Triple Series, starting with the Grade 1 Belmont Derby, which will be run in early July. This race run by a 3-year-old who had done all of his prior running on the dirt. Emmanuel had been on the Derby trail, had run okay in a few of the preps, 3rd in the bluegrass, but Fletcher had mentioned a few times on the Derby Trail that this was a horse that they were thinking about turf in the back of their minds, and he was not just making small talk or trainer speak. They actually meant it, because this horse got on the turf and clearly relished the surface switch. He did, though, benefit from the fact that this was a paceless race, and nobody was able to challenge him for the early lead. They just could not bridge the gap in the late stages.
Yeah, I remember when he was winning at Tampa early on. He won that allowance race with a really slow pace, and I do remember thinking the same, that he's a turf horse. Now, if you look in the Timeform US charts, I actually made a typo. You're only going to see a speed figure of 100, but that should actually be a 108, which is, pretty decent number for this time of a year for 3-year-olds. But as you said, there's plenty faster 3-year-olds out there. So he's going to have to do better than this if he's going to continue on that New York turf trail.
Yeah, there were some minor disappointments in this race. Chad Brown had a couple of runners that looked promising, Unanimous Consent and Napoleonic War. Surprised Unanimous Consent didn't take as much money as I expected him to in this race. He was just a little bit dull overall. Napoleonic War, he's a horse that was surprisingly behind Unanimous Consent early, because you would have thought he'd have a little bit more tactical speed. He got up for second here. I thought Limited Liability, who was third, might have run the best race of those that finished in behind, because he was way, way back in the early going. They weren't going that quickly up front, and he was closing fastest of all at the end, and seems like a kind of horse that would appreciate more ground down the line. So maybe he's one that you want to look at. But watching this race, Craig, it kind of makes me think, if any good Euros come over for that Turf Triple Series, they're probably going to be pretty dangerous.
Yeah, and that's not really a surprise. That is normally the case. Yeah, I was, for a grade 2 race, let's be honest, this was pretty below average, even with not based on the figure that's in the chart right now, but the 108. It's nothing special. So we would definitely need some jump ups from these to compete with the horses we're invariably going to see come over.
Yeah, and I already saw Charlie Appleby saying that he was likely to take over Modern Games, last year's Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf winner, after he finished third in the French Derby last week. So just his presence alone would be pretty formidable for the American. So we'll see who else decides to come for those races in the coming months. Moving over to Penn National on Friday night, we saw a couple of races in the same division, 3-year-olds on the turf that got bigger speed figures, though. Craig, these are numbers that I think you'd agree with me I might want to take with a grain of salt, just given the turf condition at Penn National on Friday night. So soft that you rarely see American races run over courses that are rated this low. I believe it was a 3 out of 10 on the track condition rating. That's just basically heavy as opposed to soft.
Yeah, I actually didn't do these numbers personally, which this is one that my partner usually does. And yeah, I didn't know what to make of it. I'm not going to criticize them at all, because I haven't taken a deep look, but I just don't know how much these numbers are going to mean going forward. One of them got a huge pace upgrade, which I can understand. I'm sure there was a reason for it, but it's one I'm going to give a deep look later this week. But no matter what numbers show up, that 3 track rating is just gonna, I don't know if I'm gonna put a line through these horses when I handicap and base them on prior form.
Yeah, clearly the course had taken plenty of rain. It's probably not a course that's even designed to take that much rain, and these horses, some of them just obviously did not handle the surface at all. The winner, wow, what a summer, of the grade 2 Penn Mile, got a 116. He was 83-1. So you kind of are scratching your head, where did this performance come from? He was one of the ones that clearly relished the going, whereas others did not. Annapolis, who was second, maybe the best 3-year-old turf horse that we saw from the Todd Pletcher barn this past week, because I believe a lot of people would rate him higher than Emmanuel, the Pennine Ridge winner. Perhaps they have slightly different distance limitations, but I'm not going to hold this loss against Annapolis at 2-5. He had shown a lot of ability last year, and I would look for him to move forward off this race, getting back on a more conventionally watered turf course. And as for the fillies, Haughty was pretty impressive winning the Penn Oaks, but nobody showed up in behind her. I mean, a 60-1 shot was second.
Yeah, it was kind of, we gave this race a 111, same thing. It looks a little more like it fits. based on the other horses in the field. But this is also one that got a huge pace upgrade. And I'm pretty sure this was the first day of the year that they even ran on the turf at Penn. And just for comparison's sake, Penn is usually the fastest turf course that I deal with year in and year out. It gets probably 9s or 10s every single time they run on firm turf. So it just shows what a different course this was.
Let's finish things up this week by going out west to talk about a couple of sprint races there from their weekend cards. The Grade 3 Desert Stormer was the feature race on Saturday for the filly and mare sprinters. A race that I'm not sure is going to have this graded status much longer based on the field that was assembled. Nothing against the winner, Becca Taylor, who is just a nose shy of being undefeated in 9 career starts, but she's a pretty good California bred. I don't think anyone's mistaking her for graded stakes quality, and the speed figure kind of speaks to that.
Yeah, it's actually a little higher than what I had sent. I got the official back today, so it's going to be a 114, but that's still nothing that's going to put fear into any grade 1 type horses, I wouldn't think. But I don't want to knock her too much. I mean, she is a cool filly. As a 4-year-old, as you say, she's now won 8 of 9. It's just a nose loss on the turf. She's run well on dirt. She's actually won on all 3 surfaces, dirt, synthetic, turf. So just a cool horse, and maybe she's just one that runs as fast as she needs to win, because it's not like she wins by a lot of open lengths when she's in her races. She generally has fairly tight decisions. So she's definitely one with some talent and some heart for sure. So I look forward to following her the rest of the year.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I'm probably being a little bit negative. She is a nice horse. She shows up every time, like you were saying. She is really gritty. She fights for those wins. She did not want to lose that race 3 back in the Irish O'Brien on the turf. She really fought hard that day, but just lost by a nose. And having won on all 3 surfaces, synthetic, turf, and dirt, she's pretty cool. And she found the right spot here. The runner-up was just a 3-year-old, danced to the music, and she ran okay as well, getting engaged in that fast pace. But just the fact that a 3-year-old was below 2-1 in this race, coming off a single M1X allowance win, kind of speaks to the lack of quality in this, or the lack of depth in this division out west right now. Horse that might be able to join this division after not too long, Craig, being a 3-year-old herself, is the Midnight Memories, who we saw on Sunday going a similar distance on the dirt course. A horse that had attracted a lot of attention in her debut when she had won in pretty fast time, done so in impressive fashion. But coming back for this second start, probably not as fast a speed figure, but had some excuses.
Yeah, this was a race that kind of caught my eye. I just said she had run a 114 speed figure first time out, breaking her maiden, did so coming from off the pace. So I was impressed. She obviously was going to be heavily bet off that effort, and she went off 2-5. But I think this is a replay that's worth watching. I don't have the official speed figure for this one, but frankly, I don't think the number is going to matter. It's not going to come back fast. I know that for sure. But what I saw in this race was she had some trouble at the gate. It wasn't catastrophic trouble. She was just a little bit slow coming out of there, lost position, got shuffled a bit, but the pace was really slow in this race, and she was able to still make a nice wide sweeping move around the field. So to me, she showed that she's still pretty talented no matter what the number comes back. Now, we haven't really seen anybody come back out of her maiden race to maybe verify that speed figure. A couple horses have run back, but they did so on turf with mixed results. The horse who was second to her that set the fast pace hasn't run back, but she is one I think has some ability.
Yeah, I mean, she definitely stumbled pretty badly at the start, and that's not something you ever want to see. And I mean, after that, she got a decent enough trip, was a little bit wide. As you said, she was against a slow pace, but she ran well with a similar trip in her debut coming from just off the pace, although she probably didn't have to take as much kickback that day. I would have still liked to see her finish off the race a little better, just considering who was behind her, but it was just the second start of her career, and she ran fine. As you said, that debut speed figure looks legitimate just based on who was in that race, but there was a first-time starter that was second behind her, well ahead of the rest, so you do want to see it get some validation reputation. Not sure that she quite provided it here, but just based on what's out there in California right now, I wouldn't be surprised if she's competitive in a graded stakes next time.
Yeah, and for the record, I mean, when I say slow pace, this was a really slow pace. Like, they're all going to be in blue. There's going to be quite the noticeable change from the half-mile time to the final time. I don't know exactly what they're going to be, but it's going to be a pretty big gap. So, like I said, from a speed figure perspective, I don't think it's going to matter much. And I'll be interested to see where she shows up and how she's able to do.
Well, Craig, that's it for this week's recaps. As I said at the top of the show, it is Belmont Stakes week. Craig and I will be doing our usual array of duties this week. We'll be having a TimeformUS forecast later in the week where we'll talk about the pick 5 sequence, if not a little bit more, with all the stakes signed on for that card. We will be having a guest, Emily Gullickson, who we've had on the podcast a few times before. Looking forward to getting her take as well on those Belmont races. And Craig and I will be doing a dedicated video about the Belmont Stakes, which we'll record and should be out on Thursday afternoon. So, Craig, looking forward to discuss all that later this week. A lot to look forward to at Belmont Park. I'm not sure that all the races are supposed to come up with the biggest fields or as if there could be big upsets. Maybe not the most interesting wagering affairs. We'll see about that, but definitely a lot of star power expected on that card.
Yeah, it's always, I say this kind of a mid-season Breeders' Cup, Belmont Day. Usually most of the stars are going to show up. Yeah, it's going to be a lot of star power. They're drawing today, so I imagine the PPs will be out late this afternoon or early this evening. And I know where I'll be. I'll be looking at them and seeing the matchups and who's going to show up against who, because I suspect we're going to see some really good performances on Saturday. And these are the days that I really look forward to as a speed figure maker, because we're almost assured to get some big ones.
Yeah, I just submitted my morning line for the race later yesterday, so the draw is coming up very soon as we record this. I'm sure that it'll already be drawn by the time this podcast comes out, so we'll talk about it when we know a little bit more about the Belmont Stakes in a couple of days. Everybody, remember that you can catch all these podcasts on DRF.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Wherever you get your podcast, just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Everybody, thanks for listening, and make sure to catch that TimeformUS forecast coming up later in the week.